Greetings and salutations, everybody. Quick shout out to Independent Left News and my partner Rosa for being Uber comrades on Patreon and supporting my channel and this content. Today, I just wanted to discuss this whole idea of American patriotism or proletarian patriotism and all of that nonsense, frankly, because I saw that Jackson Hinkle had a debate last night. He was kind of moderating, asking, questions around this subject. His guests were Caleb Maupin and hadn't heard of the second guest before. I knew that Caleb Maupin, his position, he was going to be in favor of American patriotism or being an American patriot, proletarian socialism, etc. And that's obviously Jackson Hinkle's perspective as well. So I was hoping going into this debate that it would actually be a debate, and the guest opposite of Caleb Maupin, I hope that they were going to be, taking a stance against this perspective, but they weren't. They were in complete agreement with Caleb and Jackson on this topic of proletarian patriotism or being an American patriot, but still being able to identify as a, Marxist or Marxist-Leninist and a anti-imperialist. So I listened to maybe 25, 30 minutes of that last night, and frankly, I couldn't really stomach it anymore. The second guest, let's see, I'm going to look them up just so I'm not butchering their name. But the second guest was in complete agreement, like I said, with Jackson and Caleb, with Haas. So yeah, it was a debate with Haas and Caleb Maupin. And at one point, this Haas character actually said that you can't be a communist unless you're a patriot, and you're not really a patriot unless you're a communist. Jesus, like, what in the fuck are these people thinking? And just, again, completely dismissing the criticism just in a very offhand way, and not really, as Mao would say, being a critic and a self-critic super, super important, and actually not really addressing the critique that people have, particularly vulnerable, marginalized, and oppressed people within the United States, why they might have a really, frankly, negative reaction to somebody identifying as a patriot, an American patriot, or, having, using the American flag in some type of, advocacy. Like, that's going to be really off-putting to a lot of people and groups within the United States who see that flag rightfully as a sign of oppression, genocide, murder, etc. But these people were in complete agreement that, and again, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. If you're wanting to actually, be a better Marxist, then you want to actually address these concerns and have a debate where opposite sides, of that dialectic, people who support the idea that you can actually be an American patriot and be a socialist or an anti-imperialist, and people who think those two terms are reconcilable, as I would. So it's like, again, that's not a debate if both guests agree on the topic. So I had to, fortunately, I should say, I found a really great discussion and dialogue on this on the Anti-Conquista YouTube channel. They had a number of amazing guests on, and they were discussing this very topic, and they brought up a number of excellent points. The discussion is about an hour long. I'm not going to show all of that now, but I do think it is worth sharing this perspective, because again, I would have loved if Jackson, had Caleb on, and then maybe had, somebody on that was on this panel, or somebody, coming from a similar perspective, because again, that would have been so much more enlightening and exciting to listen to, instead of two people who agree on the topic and who weren't really taking the criticism seriously and saying bullshit stuff like you can't, you're not a communist if you're not a patriot. I mean, Jesus Christ. And during this discussion, I forget which guest it was, they were talking about, they were asking the question, why are people who identify as socialist or communist right now, why are they also bringing up that they are quote unquote American patriots? Like what's going on with that timing? And one of their reasons that another guest said that this might be happening right now is due to the fact that the right wing is maybe getting stronger, more powerful in this country, and they want to attract more white people into the movement, and they think that would be a good way to do that. But this guest, Matt, what is his name here? Matt Cedillo brought up the point, people on the left don't make the effort to, coddle and handhold and, right-wing Cuban reactionaries in Miami, the Gusanos. We don't do that for Zionists or these other right-wing reactionary groups within the United States. So why do we need to coddle and handhold these people who identify as, American patriots or proletarian patriots or patriots or whatever? We can, educate these people, let them know why this is a very problematic view to have, especially to the most vulnerable, marginalized communities of color, indigenous folks, etc., immigrants to this country. It's a very problematic view to have. Educate them, and if you're not getting on board with that, then you're kind of an enemy of the revolutionary struggle, because again, we don't need to be we don't need to be coddling the feelings of these reactionary figures in order to bring them into the movement. If we're really concerned about that, then we educate, we try to show why this is a very problematic position to have. If we're really wanting to build revolutionary change within this country, it does not need to be through these what you could frankly say is a racist dog whistle, in my opinion, saying that you're an American patriot. Look what the fucking flag stands for in the United States, and these chumps want to prop it up as something that so-called Marxist-Leninists or anti-imperialists should be okay with, displaying or bringing to events or whatever. I mean, it's fucking disgusting. Get out of here. That's completely and utterly ridiculous. Here we go. So this is the YouTube interview I was talking about, Anti-Conquista. This is the first video of them I've watched on YouTube. It is amazing. They got Victor Coronado, the guests were Matt Cedillo, Karina Akri Payaz. I could be mispronouncing their name. I apologize if I am. Danny Haifong, contributing editor at the Black Agenda Report, Carlos Cruz Mascaro. So let's take a look and we'll discuss, because again, I think the analysis that is presented here is the actual Marxist analysis position to take on this topic. Because again, the Marxist worldview is that the world is always changing. Nothing remains static. We need a concrete analysis of the concrete conditions as they are at the time, not some imagined time in the past when maybe perhaps it made sense to identify as American patriot or whatnot. Sure as hell doesn't make sense to do that now, 21st century, post 9/11, etc. So it's just a real fantasy that these people who are wanting us to identify as American patriots are holding that up as some ideal. It's completely freaking ridiculous.
All right, revolutionary greetings. This is Victor Coronado alongside Carlos Cruz Mosquera. We are Anti-Conquista. Please like, please share, please subscribe. We're on all social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. This is episode 12 of Nuestra America.
Let me fast forward.
American Patriot, which is I think a political line of the Communist Party USA. And we saw people of color, not even us, just challenging that. And then this whole thing just played out all over social media. So it got us to think,
Red, white, and blue
let's
is a
talk
hate
about
symbol.
this.
I
We've talked
agree.
about this before a lot, anti-conquista on prior programs, but I'll hand it over to the guests. Your thoughts on this and what your position is on this. So, and what do you think of all this?
Yeah. Oh, sure. Well, I think what first comes to mind is that if those who proclaim themselves to be socialists and communists and Marxists really understand Marxism, then you have to understand that Marxism is a philosophy that helps guide us in how to understand the world as it is always changing.
Yeah, as I said.
So, for example,
Marxism does not view the world as being a static thing. Things are always changing. The concrete conditions are always changing. That needs to be taken into effect. Those people that are talking about being American patriots are being anti-Marxist in their analysis. So again, you can't be an American patriot and be a Marxist or be an anti-imperialist.
The ways in which communists might have used patriotism during the Second World War, for example, in completely different conditions than how the world is constructed now, cannot just be automatically stamped on this current moment to justify
100%.
the use of this concept of patriotic socialism as the sort of vanguard ideology of any kind of revolutionary movement in the United States.
It can't be a vanguard revolutionary ideology. It's a complete opposite. I would say identifying as American patriotic socialist is counter-revolutionary, frankly.
Right now, the United States is a declining empire. It is an empire that is built upon the blood-soaked profits that were accumulated from endless genocide,
slavery of Africans,
endless enslavement that has continued into modern day.
Can I just say that Danny Haifong rarely misses in his analysis. If you're not already a patron of his, definitely check him out. He is worth supporting, no doubt.
Forms. And many of the communists who proclaim communists who champion this patriotic socialist line have not paid much attention to those of which are challenging.
Yeah, which is exactly what happened on that debate that Jackson Hinkle had between Caleb Maupin and Haas. They both agreed on the topic and they completely dismissed the perspectives that are being displayed during this awesome panel
narrative. Because right now in 2021, after 20 years of the war on terror, after multiple uprisings led by Black people around the issue of racist policing, after how many movements in the global South, whether we're talking about the rise of China, the ascendance of left-wing movements in Latin America, or we're talking about the continuous struggle against imperialism that goes on in the continent of Africa. All of these issues tend to fall by the wayside in order to champion this kind of patriotic ideology, which says that we need to put white workers.
Yes, I do find that very problematic, right? This whole notion of being an American patriot, a patriotic socialist, it seems like that is frankly kind of a dog whistle to white people. Like, no, we're going to make you feel comfortable. Come into the movement. Your needs, your emotions, that's what matters the most, not the views of the marginalized and oppressed communities of color, indigenous folks, other marginalized groups within the U.S. Their feelings and perspectives be damned. We need to value, the white worker the most. I mean, that is really, really disgusting. And the people who hold this view aren't really addressing these concerns at all. And again, it would have been so much more elucidating if Jackson had actually had on somebody like Matt or Karina or Carlos or Danny or Victor to actually have a debate, so they would be hearing the opposite perspective, and maybe after doing that they would be able to have a little self-criticism, some reflection, and reflect back on maybe why the position of being an American patriot and still identifying as a socialist is very problematic and very hurtful, frankly, to the groups and the communities in the US who see the flag and the idea of being an American patriot as very harmful to themselves and their communities. And that's what that flag and that label has represented since the founding of this country.
In command of the movement here in the United States. That doesn't have really any historical basis to it. Whenever white workers themselves have led movements, they've always been attached.
Yep, he's right. It's always been communities of color at, leading these revolutionary movements throughout, the history of the United States, whether it be the Underground Railroad, the Black Panther Party, Black Lives Matter movement, etc. It's not, we shouldn't be centering the needs, the voice of the white worker. We need to be making room for the vulnerable, the marginalized, oppressed to feel comfortable, safe, and supported. And if you identify as a American patriot, a patriotic socialist, you're doing the complete opposite of that, and you're causing a lot of harm to those communities who have already suffered so much oppression, repression, genocide, murder at the hands of the U.S. empire, the settler colonial state that it is.
To racism, and that has to be acknowledged. This, and I'll let Matt maybe and Karina talk about this, because I mean they're in California, so they may know more about the socialist movement in California has had extreme and immense problems with white workers leading movements, often at times at the exclusion of, let's say, Chinese laborers or indigenous people. And that,
I mean, frankly, to put it very bluntly, sometimes white people, especially within these leftist or socialist movements, need to shut the fuck up and actually listen to the criticisms that are being, leveled against them. Very genuine criticisms that are coming from a place of, wanting to educate, as this panel is trying to do, to people who wrongly identify as socialists, but also as, American patriots. Like, shut the fuck up for a second and actually listen to what these people are saying. And I think if you actually did that in a real genuine manner, then you would stop identifying as that, and you would stop trying to, prop this idea up and defend it with such veracity, because, deep down, it is pretty problematic. At least you should.
It's something I think we need to stay away from, this politics of exclusionism that's brandished as some kind of universalist ideology. Patriotism just is not that. It's not that in the United States. Michael Parenti cannot be cited in 2002.
He also, I forget who brings it up, but the point, shoot, I just forgot what he said. Let thought come back
something
to me.
That is the source.
Oh, okay. It came back to me. The idea, like, the white working class is not a monolith. Not every white person needs to be coddled and have their hand held. Some of us can be educated on these things and come to the correct conclusion that is frankly very problematic and disgusting to identify as a socialist and an anti-imperialist, but also saying that you're a patriot, an American patriot, a proletarian patriot, whatever. So again, the white working class, not a monolith. Some of us are worth saving, and we can be educated on this topic and be brought into a movement that isn't about centering our voice and needs, but one that is able to create space to have these dialogues and discussions, so people are able to come to the right conclusion on these issues. But again, by doing it through a Marxist lens, looking at the concrete conditions, concrete analysis of the concrete conditions at the time. And these people that identify as socialists and American patriots aren't doing that. They aren't doing that type of work, and they need to, do that and shut the fuck up, frankly.
Guiding ideology for today. We've had 20 years to reflect upon what has happened. We just passed through 9/11. We know where patriotism takes us in the United States and in the Western world.
Into wars, into death, destruction, sanctions. I mean, for fuck's sake, look at the huge huge price Colin Kaepernick paid just for simply kneeling during the fucking national anthem before NFL games. He was blackballed out of the NFL, even though he was hugely talented. He paid a huge price simply for doing a silent protest during the national fucking anthem. But these American patriots, these socialists, these anti-imperialists want to hold up the American flag as something that we should be admiring as socialists, as anti-imperialists. I mean, get the fuck out of here. Like, again, how disconnected are these people from the actual Marxist position on this? Karl Marx was alive today, he would be coming to the same conclusion as these people if he was being true to Marxism.
It takes us down to an abyss of the most hyper reactionary nationalism, no matter how much we try to deal with that in our minds, right? Deal with it and try to shape shift it so it fits.
because the people who are parodying this, being an American patriot and a Marxist, are somehow compatible. They aren't being genuine in their analysis. They aren't actually looking at the material conditions that we are in right now and how that is a very problematic and self-destructive position to have, especially if you're wanting to build a broad movement that includes people of color, the marginalized, the oppressed, indigenous folks, migrants, LGBTQ folks, etc. Because when you label yourself as a patriot, when you're okay with using the American flag in the backdrop of your videos, as Jackson Hinkle does, you're probably going to be viewed as an enemy, as an outsider, somebody that you should probably be afraid of and stay away from. And that's why these people aren't really actually, listening to this genuine criticism. They're just deflecting and not taking it into real account. And that's problematic. Again, self-criticism is super, super important if you're actually wanting to be a Marxist, if you're wanting to be a scientific socialist. That dialectic, having, opposing ideas, listening to the evidence, listening to the arguments. And if new evidence comes in that, is different than how you view something, then you take in that new evidence as like, oh, okay, that does make a lot of sense what these people are saying. Maybe I should drop that label. Maybe it is very problematic. These people aren't willing to do that because they are being very reactionary and anti-Marxist in their analysis.
Our particular desires. That's not what Marxism is. Marxism is not about fitting our particular desires to feel included in this process. It's about doing the real work of studying the objective reality before us. Precisely. And that reality is that we need to be putting the fight against empire first, the fight against racism first, as we conduct this class struggle.
Co-sign everything you just said. Thank you, Danny. And yeah, so the question is, and I guess one of the questions that we had for you guys, Matt, Karina, and Danny, is why now? Why is the socialist or the left, I would say largely the white left and the white socialist, pushing for
I don't see a whole lot of people on the left to identify a lot of people of color on the left to identify as socialist or anti-imperialist or communist identifying as American patriots. I do see it's usually these white, what I would say, reactionaries who are being very anti-Marxist in their analysis, who are using that label, not people of color, not the vulnerable, not the marginalized, not the oppressed. It's the people who have, benefited from white supremacy and racism in the United States, who seem to be very, connected to that ideal, which again is completely disconnected from reality.
Right now, why do you guys think that is?
Well, I saw an enormous shift. Back in like 2015, I saw an enormous shift. I mean, not even an enormous shift. These kind of ideas were always like latent; they're always there. But this kind of like doubling down, this kind of like affirming, this kind of whatever. For me, anyways, I experienced it with the rise of Donald Trump, and I started saying things like, "Well, you look at this, and this is really dangerous. This is actually particularly dangerous. This is not like a proletarian thing. This is not good. And I was hit back with like, you know, well, you're being a cultural nationalist, or you're doing this. What about the white working class, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that they really kind of heard this like kind of call, like it's okay to be white. And I think that really spoke like in their heart. It spoke to them.
It does seem like that's something that like Caleb and definitely, you know, seems to fall into this type of characterization that Matt is talking about, right?
As well. I mean, just because you
not
have
as familiar with Has or Haas to say that, but I've seen enough of Caleb's work and commentary to see that fits him to a T, I think.
Economic program, just because you think that, you know, it's not right that billionaires should be living in yachts and people should be eating out of trash cans, doesn't mean you're not racist.
That's
These are
true.
Two separate questions. Yep. I mean, that's good that you think that. I mean, that's good. That's a positive thing. But the fact that you're still racist is negative. It's really bad.
Yeah, and again, I mean, living in the United States, this white supremacist, very racist country since its founding, especially white people, we have a lot of views that are probably problematic and racist to their core, even though we might think we're the farthest thing from that. And oftentimes white people are very reactionary when they are called out correctly for engaging in, you know, racist thought, behavior, or action. So I completely agree with what Matt is saying here.
And so we have to really understand these are really separate questions. And these are all kind of gut questions too, because oftentimes we talk about things like we need to be anti-imperialist, we need to fight colonialism and setter colonies. These are all like just labels. These are all just like,
what does that mean in practice?
Abstractions to get at, you know, really get your fingers in the dirt to really understand what we're talking about. Because when we start talking about the brass tacks of it, then it's undeniable. You know, we're talking about a world where, you know, Mexico imports corn, where Thailand imports rice. We're talking about a world dominated by corporate interests. We're talking about a world dominated by that, and it's most excruciatingly felt
by
places that have been
color.
colonized, in places that have been colonized. Again, that word is an abstraction. What we're talking about getting bombed. We're talking about being conquered. We're talking about people going in and killing people and overthrowing economies and pulling those economies into this imperial economy, into the larger economy, and that's what happened the world over. Like that's the mechanics of it. And when we get back to the mechanics of it, all this stuff is just nonsense.
Agreed.
We say, you know, proletarian patriotism.
What the fuck does that mean?
Proletarian patriotism. What does the word patriotism mean? I mean, why is it that when you say proletarian patriotism, white people feel good and everyone else feels bad? Why is that? Why
That's kind of problematic, right?
What does the word patriotism actually mean? You know, when you look at the country of America, you're talking about a country where, you know, people got mad that, you know, Colin Kaepernick's taking a knee because it's unpatriotic for him to take a knee. Well, what is he supposed to be pledging allegiance to?
Yeah, right.
Flag. What does that flag represent?
Yeah,
it represents George Washington.
Yeah,
it represents people playing the flute.
Who is George Washington, along with the majority of the founding fathers, owned slaves. Again, the flag, being an American patriot, we should not be celebrating that. Highly, highly problematic, especially to the mass of victims that have felt the wrath of the U.S. empire, of the settler colonial state, and they are number in the millions, right? Tens, hundreds at this point,
and like marching, you know, and crossing the Delaware, and you know, so he's, you know, refusing to somehow like pay homage to a slave driver, to a genocidal maniac. That's wrong. You know, that's unpatriotic. So I mean, we got to really just really dig our fingers into what we are talking about. And then it becomes even more. The question becomes even more absurd.
Yeah, I agree.
Of what it is. But why is it happening at the time? I think because, you know, over the past, I don't know, 30, 40 years, there's you know, since the 70s, there's been a kind of a veneer of progress. And it's not really economic itself. It's not real.
Economically, the conditions have definitely deteriorated since that time. Wages stagnating, union membership has dropped, wealth and income equality has skyrocketed, student debt, less people, young people owning their homes. And again, this is going to be felt the most by the vulnerable, by the marginalized, by the oppressed. Again, the white people in the United States have always been placed, even the poor working class have always been a step above people of color, indigenous, these other, you know, oppressed groups.
Progress is not really like the lives of people.
Which again is something I found, I don't know, pretty problematic about the debate that Caleb Hinkle had. Is at one point that Jackson Hinkle had, Caleb was talking about how white people in the South didn't actually benefit from slavery. I mean, what in the actual fuck are you talking about? They weren't enslaved. They were still I mean, Jesus, you got to be pretty unhinged to think that, frankly.
Actually got worse in that time period, the standard of living. But there is a cultural, the country pretends to be less racist. I don't know exactly. I don't want to say that it's progress, but the country shifted in a way, right, where it's like less cool to be openly racist. Like it's less cool.
But we still have these systems of white supremacy in place, like the prison industrial complex, where the United States imprisons more people than anywhere in the world, particularly Black people, brown people, indigenous folks, etc., political prisoners.
To be like a Don Rickles type character, right? That's not as cool as it once was. And they're really angry about that. And you know, you see that in the expression of like the right wing. But I feel a lot of people who are in the communist movement are equally racist. And you know, I call them the alt-reds, you know.
Alt-reds.
And they're really like they feel that same call. Like they feel the call of Charlottesville. Like, you know, we will take our country back. God damn it. We will take our movement back. We're taking the communist movement back. You know, like for too long have we been the victim here. So I think that's they feel the same thing as the right-wing fascists.
One thing that I wanted to pick up on what Matt was saying is these terms like imperialism, colonialism, as they're being used in the West, particularly in the US where you guys are, is such a simplistic definitions that the left has, that I would say the Western left has of these terms. So imperialism, for example, and I was listening and seeing some of the conversation around, you know, the pushing of this patriotism, and so they'll say things like, you know, we are anti-imperialist and we recognize that the US is an imperialist country, but the best way to fight back is to take back our country, but because they have a very
you can't take it back. It's always been a imperialist settler colonial state and is now a empire that's run on imperialism and death and destruction, particularly of people in the global South, but are also built on, again, the genocide of the indigenous, the enslavement of the African people, and then the oppression of those same groups is currently happening. You can't separate the two. They're intimately connected, as Carlos is talking about here.
One-dimensional definition of things like imperialism, which is that the US is invading countries militarily without really thinking about how the economy, the entire economy
benefits
of the US
from that,
and Europe and the Western world and the first world in general, Japan, Australia, and so on, is the economy itself is based on looting the global South, looting the third world, and exploiting also, you know, oppressed communities within those nations as well, and usually
within
it's
the
Black,
US,
Latinos, immigrants, who are worse off in these countries, in these Western countries. And so because of that very shallow definition of imperialism, they don't understand that actually we do need to destroy these countries, the structures of these countries, the economies of these countries, the institutions that exist in these countries, because just taking it over. And what I heard a lot from the people who are spouting this patriotism stuff is that, you know, they want to take over the US state and make it Marx and make it socialist. But if you don't have a proper imperialist
analysis
or understanding of imperialism, what would happen is that you take over this country and you don't understand that the country's economy is based on looting the rest of the world. So what are you going to do? You're going to redistribute the wealth of imperialism amongst your own workers, amongst your own people, without thinking of, you know, how these economies are tied to the rest of the world. It's just a very shallow kind of and it's exactly that, very nationalistic way of
anti-Marxist as well.
I think to touch on Carlos's question about why it is we're seeing an uptick in the discussion is because the conflicts are becoming more and more obvious, and the conflicts are becoming are putting more and more pressure on people to confront this issue and discuss this issue. Because, you know, I think that we know social media has kind of allowed so many different avenues of criticism and analysis to come forward that, you know, especially within the quote unquote left or socialist communities, these contradictions are being pushed harder and harder to the forefront. And then when you have, you know, white workers who are, you know, proclaim socialism, then, you know, I would say, you know, the collective historical memory of the American white worker is linked to certainly nationalist symbols and stories. And these
like the
symbols
flag,
and stories,
right?
like the American flag, are so inextricably linked to terror for the other that, you know, it's very difficult to separate the two. And it's very difficult to confront the idea that, you know, there is no way to remove that tarnish. There is no way to remove
how do the people square that? The people who are upholding this idea of you can still be an American patriot but a socialist, as Karina was saying there, the American flag to the other in this country is a symbol of hate, repression, war, murder, genocide, land theft, all these horrible things that it represents. How can somebody who identifies as a socialist square that? Like, you can't if you actually take this analysis and critique seriously. But again, that's why probably Jackson didn't actually want to engage with somebody who had a different opinion than him on this topic, because they aren't actually being genuine when they want to have these conversations. They just want their biases upheld, basically, and that's very, very anti-Marx in their thinking and the way they went about this, frankly.
That blood from the American flag. And I would point out that I don't believe there is any inherent contradiction between patriotism and socialism. For example, socialist patriotism can encourage love for the socialist homeland, and in that sense, foster feelings of great love for revolutionary transformation of society, and for it can be compatible with socialism and internationalism. And in fact, with the current state of nation states, it may be a requisite for achieving national liberation for many states.
But we don't have that.
But to dismiss every type of patriotism, so that in that grain, to dismiss every type of patriotism may be to dismiss the history of national liberation. And so while global socialism is necessary and desirable, we live in an age when the nation state remains the most practical vehicle to bring about that type of liberation that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so a fundamental characteristic of this nation state would therefore need to be that it's anti-imperialist. So coming down to the discussion of the U.S. patriotism within the framework of a white supremacist empire, all of that goes out the window. They are completely and inherently contradictory.
Agreed.
And moreover, a capitalist dictatorship can never be confused with a socialist homeland.
I like that. A capitalist dictatorship can never be confused with a socialist homeland. I'm going to end it there. I think we listened to about 17 minutes of that excellent discussion. I'm going to link it down below in case you want to check out the rest of it. I highly recommend it. It goes on till about the hour mark, as I said. And again, I think the people who are still holding on to the idea that you can be a socialist and an American patriot really, frankly, need to do some soul searching and expose themselves to some different ideas and thoughts on this topic, and actually have some self-criticism and actually go about it from a Marxist perspective. Because what Jackson and Caleb and that Haas person were doing, they were being very anti-Marx in how they went about this. They weren't actually looking at they weren't using a concrete analysis of the concrete conditions as it pertains to this question. And that is pretty problematic, in my opinion. And also, again, just really silly. How is it a debate if both guests agree on the topic? I mean, that was like, what the fuck? Again, like that's just really, really, I don't know, a waste of time, frankly, if somebody was going there to listen to a debate. They did not get that. So those are some thoughts. I'd love to hear yours. Like the video, subscribe for more content. All part of the people. Peace. Much love.